What's good, Deck Gang? The top story this week is all about how Valve is doing it again. They are quite possibly on the verge of something special because before Valve, playing PC games on handheld or playing PC games on Linux at all was incredibly niche, and just 3 short years since the Steam Deck was first announced, games are expected to run on Linux and games are expected to be scalable enough to run on a handheld. People playing PC games have these expectations, and it's relatively newsworthy when a game doesn't achieve either of those two considerations, and it's all because of the work that not only Valve undertook, but many other people as well. And I think that although Valve are keeping their moves really quiet, you can tell that they're sowing the seeds, and you can begin to see that we're close to all of that happening all over again. You see, just like running PC games on Linux, there's something else that even more people have been wanting for a long time, and that's running PC games on your phone, or running PC games on Android, or even just running PC games on any ARM device. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say that those things don't come with problems of their own, but it seems like Valve is attempting to address at least some of those issues. Most notably this week, we got some clarity around the partnership that they have with Arch Linux, by the way. Now, you already know that Valve didn't want the Steam Deck to run on Windows. I mean, they've been pushing gaming on Linux for years now, because if people were PC gaming on Linux, then that would mean that Valve would not be beholden to Microsoft's whims. Valve could be in control of the entire ecosystem. But it's a lot of work to create your own operating system or even Linux distro, so Valve partnered with pre-existing Linux distros. Both SteamOS 1 and SteamOS 2 were based on Debian. Ubuntu is a popular Linux distro that's also based on Debian, so that move made plenty of sense at the time. But for various reasons, Valve moved to Arch Linux for SteamOS 3, the SteamOS that would power the Steam Deck. One of the reasons Valve preferred Arch is because Arch Linux has a rolling update model. This means that users get updates to various systems as soon as they're available. Users would not have to wait for a major release of the distro to get the latest update. This is very key to Valve's latest move in their partnership with Arch Linux, which was actually announced last week, and I even covered that on this channel in the last Deck News Roundup. In that announcement, they said that they were excited to announce Arch Linux is entering into a direct collaboration with Valve, and that Valve would be, quote, generously providing backing for 2 critical projects that would have a huge impact on our distribution, a build service infrastructure and a secure signing enclave, end quote. From a software development perspective, this support from Valve is going to allow the Arch team to get updates to users even faster than they have been. Before this partnership, the Arch Linux team would have had to take some manual steps in order to build and sign packages that would eventually get to the user, but a build service infrastructure and a secure signing enclave would allow them to automate a lot of that work. But this week, we got even a little more information about this partnership, and I think it provides a good deal of clarity on the direction that Valve is headed in. I first saw this reported on Gaming on Linux, so shout out to Liam for covering this one, because after the initial announcement, one Arch Linux developer named Antiz did an interview with a Linux-focused YouTube channel, AirMax. In that interview, Antiz disclosed that these 2 projects were both things that Arch Linux had been planning for some time, but because Arch Linux is a community-driven project, that meant that it's really difficult to begin this effort in earnest, because you're not able to pay these folks. So this is where Valve steps in to sponsor these projects by contracting developers on a freelance basis so that they can actually get this work across the finish line. But maybe you're asking yourself at this point, what does support from Valve have anything to do with Steam coming to ARM devices? Well, in that same interview, Antiz also said that these 2 projects are considered to be prerequisites for Arch Linux to support additional instruction sets like x86, ARM, and RISC-V. He made a point to say that Valve's sponsorship is not necessarily about those projects, but it's definitely the context in which these 2 projects would be beneficial. Now, the timing here is incredible because it also leaked a couple weeks ago that Valve is working on something called Proton ARM. Proton ARM is going to be a way to make Windows x86 and Windows ARM games playable on a Linux ARM device. When I reported on that news, it was clear that this work was primarily directed towards Valve's head-mounted display that they've been not so secretly working on. It's codenamed the Deckard, and while I do still believe this to be the case, this is a lot of investment that Valve are putting into ARM, and it's possible that the sky is the limit for what this sort of technology could be used for. Valve could eventually create an ARM-based Steam Deck, and maybe they don't stop at simply Linux ARM. Maybe they could eventually look to be compatible with Android ARM, which just opens them up to all sorts of devices. So if you're wondering why this is important, it simply means that Valve is looking at other ways to bring you Steam games. Maybe it could one day be a Steam Deck that fits in your pocket just like your phone, or maybe one day it could be your actual phone that can have a SteamOS interface. Now, these things are not going to happen in a matter of weeks or even months, but we should start to hear more about whatever Valve are planning in the coming year. I think it's clear that Valve have seen the success with the Steam Deck, and they're going to be investing a lot more into potential future hardware. And I don't know, for me, that is something that is incredibly exciting. Listen guys, if you want to avoid reaching 0% and you're looking to keep your handheld from running low on battery, I have just the thing for you. The new Ugreen Uno charger 100 watt is compact, and it's not only great for charging any of your accessories, but it also does a great job of pairing functionality with aesthetics. It has these adorable little robot feet to protect the prongs and adorable robot emojis to let you know whether the device you have is currently charging or already fully charged. It can also simply let you know that the charger itself is in standby. It's small but mighty and delivers up to 100 watts of high power through the C1 or C2 port. This is perfect for charging your MacBook Pro and other Apple devices swiftly. I can charge an iPhone 15 Pro from 0 to 60% in 30 minutes, and it can even charge 4 devices at once thanks to the 3 USB-C ports and 1 USB-A port. Now, I'm a big fan of Ugreen accessories because they're reliable and designed with tech geeks in mind. Shout out to the whole series of Ugreen Uno products, including the cute and convenient 15-watt wireless charger. You can check out all Ugreen products using my links below, and thank you to Ugreen for sponsoring this video. All right, the next story is that someone is finally working on the Steam controller that we have all wanted to see, but it's not Valve. This is a hobbyist that goes by the name of Camp Creates, and even Camp himself says that he has no idea how far he's going to get with this, but I'm not going to lie, this would be a dream come true for me. This tweet was shared in the FanDeck Discord, and Camp said that although he's been hard at work on another project, sometimes inspiration strikes and you need to get your ideas out there. So this is a Steam controller that he modeled in CAD, and it basically takes the form of the Steam Deck, but without the screen. It has the 2 trackpads, the Steam and quick access buttons, as well as the 4 paddles, not to mention capacitive analog sticks and gyro. In fact, it would literally just be the controls from a Steam Deck. When responding to Steam Deck HQ, he said, quote, "It's going to use Steam Deck control modules, so I need to create the shell, the electronics to connect the modules, and the code to use the modules and send controller data over Bluetooth/USB," end quote. Because he's trying to reuse and repurpose the Steam Deck modules, there are going to be some limitations in terms of things like button layout. For example, one person said that they would love to see a Wii U button layout, and Camp replies, quote, "I'm trying to reuse the models from the Steam Deck, so I think the face buttons are going to need to stay put. I should be able to move the sticks and the trackpads though," end quote. Also, there were a few people worried a bit about ergonomics. For example, one person said that although the Steam Deck is very comfortable, they were worried that without the screen in the middle, this square design would just be too uncomfortable to hold. Cam said he's going to print a 3D shell to see how comfortable it is for him to hold, and perhaps they can adjust from there. Additionally, he said that currently the design is a bit wider than an Xbox Series controller, so I'd say that's good news for folks with larger hands like myself. Camp also pointed out that without the speakers, there would be a good amount of empty space in the middle, so he pitched that maybe he could use this space for a BlackBerry Q10 physical keyboard. This especially got my attention because the mini physical keyboards I use from time to time all have these spongy keys, which honestly don't feel too great, and I yearn for the old school Xbox 360 chat pad. That thing was absolutely amazing. It was built like a brick, and it felt absolutely great to type on there. Personally, I ended up getting quite fast with typing on that keyboard, and there really hasn't been anything like that since. Something like this built into a Steam controller would be perfect for me and would make couch gaming even easier. And that's exactly why I would want something like this in the first place. Although I mostly play my handhelds in handheld mode, I do still dock them so that I can play games on a bigger screen. And when I do, I often miss the controls of the Steam Deck, especially when I'm playing first-person shooters. I don't often play things like RTSs, but if I did, then trackpads would be an absolute must. You know, Valve built these controls with the knowledge that they wanted to make almost their entire library playable, even if a game wasn't built with a controller in mind. So you do absolutely lose some of that when you go to dock mode unless you have an original Steam controller handy. But these were discontinued, so maybe they're going to be a little hard to find. More importantly though, these controls are just not nearly as good as the Steam Deck. There's no D-pad, there's no second analog stick, and there's only 2 back paddles. Don't get me wrong, this thing is great, but comparing this to the controls on the Steam Deck is like comparing a DualShock 2 to a DualSense Edge, because the latter is just that much more refined. This is also why I want to see Valve make a Steam controller too, because as good as Camp's design looks like it's going to be, I would love to see what Valve does if they're able to refine the design even further. Interestingly and relatedly, Valve just released their first Steam licensed controller in Japan, and we're starting to get some interesting impressions about that control pad. In this case, Valve worked with Hori, but I'm wondering if this might be a sign of things to come. Will Valve work with more manufacturers? Are there going to be more Steam branded controllers in the future? Will some of them have trackpads or be anywhere near as good as the Steam Deck controller? In the case of the HoriPad, I've seen some impressions from a YouTube channel named Landon. Landon pointed out that the HoriPad is quite a bit lighter than an Xbox Series controller, with the HoriPad weighing in at 184 grams, while the Xbox Series controller weighed 292 grams. It seems like the triggers there don't have much range of movement, and Landon demonstrated this with racing games. Also, he had a tough time testing gyro, though some of that may be because he was fairly new to gyro aiming. Primarily though, the gyro problems boiled down to 2 things. Most importantly, gyro was a lot more responsive when playing wired as opposed to wireless. Notoriously, the network adapter in the LCD model of the Steam Deck was pretty bad, so that might be why gyro was so choppy on wireless. It's possible that it would play much better on the Steam Deck OLED. Secondly, Landon tried gyro to joystick, which honestly has never worked well for me, or really anyone, and it should be considered a last resort, only there when you can't use gyro to mouse. He was forced to use gyro to joystick for Fallout New Vegas, which resulted in choppy inputs, but when he was able to use gyro to mouse in Portal and Team Fortress 2, it looked a lot better. I'm really happy to see these features in a controller, but I would also like to see a higher quality build and even more features in whatever the next Steam branded controller is. So what game news should you be aware of for your Steam Deck or your PC handheld? Well, quite a few actually. First, the team behind Sid Meier's Civilization 7 just released the system requirements, and they look expectedly modest. For minimum requirements, this game calls for an Intel i5-4690 and an NVIDIA GTX 1050 alongside 8GB of RAM and 20GB of storage. Now that's going to get you 30 FPS at 1080p on the low graphical preset, and they also specifically called out support for Linux and SteamOS, saying, quote, "We're also releasing Civilization 7 for macOS and Linux/SteamOS. However, we don't have specs to share for those platforms at this time," end quote. As of now, Civ 6 is still in the top 50 played Steam Deck games, so it's good to hear that they're going to continue to support this platform. Notably, Horizon Zero Dawn has been delisted from Steam, GOG, and the Epic Game Store. Horizon Zero Dawn Remastered has taken its place, at least on Steam, but this means that if you didn't already own Zero Dawn on PC, you're just going to have to pay the full $50 for the remastered version. Prior to this, the original version was consistently on sale for under $20. As recently as June, it was available for $10 on GameBillet.com. So conceivably, you could have gotten the remastered version for as low as $20, whereas now it's going to run you $50 with no telling when this game is going to resume having deep discounts. Furthermore, the PlayStation Network account is required as part of the remastered version, but wasn't required for the original. While I did consider the $10 upgrade path to be reasonable despite this game not needing a remaster, I think that the way that Sony is handling their PC strategy does continue to disappoint. Last week, we learned that the Switch emulator Ryujinx has been shut down. It has now been disclosed that the main contributor, GDK-chan, was issued a cease and desist. Famously, the other Nintendo Switch emulator, Yuzu, was shut down earlier this year when developers Tropic Haze agreed to pay $2.4 million in damages to Nintendo. With both Ryujinx and Yuzu gone, any further development on Switch emulators is likely to be considerably slowed down for some time, but pretty much the entire Switch library remains playable via emulators. This comes alongside a second copyright strike being issued against the Retro Gamecore channel, as Russ showed off the new Wii U emulator Cemu now being available on Android devices. Many people have shown support for Retro Gamecore and even condemned Nintendo for their bullying tactics. It appears that Nintendo is continuing to get more aggressive as we get closer to an announcement for the follow-up to the Nintendo Switch. By the way, if you're wondering what will happen to your installation of Ryujinx on the Steam Deck, then you shouldn't worry. Your installation should remain intact, although there will be no new versions of Ryujinx. If you haven't set up Ryujinx at all, and you're wondering how you're going to be able to do that with EmuDeck in the future, well, EmuDeck is likely to provide a bring your own Ryujinx solution as they did with Yuzu. As long as you supply the actual emulator, EmuDeck will still do its magic to configure it and set up the games in Steam. On the subject of EmuDeck, EmuDeck 2.3 has just been released out of beta. It contains a new unified UI, automatic setup of emulators in your preferred language, and a couple new options for 3DS emulation. You'll love to see it. The last update I have for EmuDeck is that they have now officially canceled their EmuDeck machines. They shared a 3D printed prototype of the EmuDeck machine on Twitter, saying that they're canceling the project due to lack of interest, citing that it's clear it's not going to reach the Indiegogo goal. While the project did seem very interesting, being a mini PC that you would connect to your television, I also understand that it is a tough sell for people when they can really just get a Steam Deck. Nonetheless, I wish the EmuDeck team the best of luck on whatever their next endeavor is. There's a new homebrew plugin for XR gaming on the Steam Deck, and it looks pretty snazzy. This is the 1.0 release of the XR gaming plugin available for Decky Loader on the Steam Deck. It includes a virtual display mode that allows you to pin your game so it doesn't follow your head movement. There's also a VR light mode that enables head tracking in first-person and third-person games in order to create a VR-like experience for non-VR games. Then there's a smooth follow mode that allows the display to follow your head movement. You can even set the follow threshold so that there's a bit of a dead zone that you can configure. The biggest update in this plugin is that it previously only worked with games that used Vulkan, but now it works with basically anything on the Steam Deck. To that end, the developer even showed off apps like Moonlight and Chiaki working with this plugin. This update specifically is only currently supported on SteamOS 3.6.15 and up, so as of now, you'll need to stick to the beta channel if you want to use this plugin. What's pretty cool is that the plugin does appear to work for a number of glasses, including Vitsure, X-Rail, Ray Neo, Rokid, and TCL. As for what's on the horizon, it appears that the developer has a number of plans, including multi-monitor support for productivity and possibly 6 degrees of freedom when it comes to head tracking. Awesome stuff. Speaking of updates, there's this mobile app called DeckFilter, and it just got an update with version 1.8. DeckFilter basically lets you manage your Steam backlog on your phone, and it's pretty awesome. It even has integrations to things like How Long to Beat and ProtonDB so that you can filter your library by game length or compatibility with the Steam Deck. In any case, version 1.8 is pretty big because it includes new features like shuffle mode, bookmark lists, default filters, and best settings as reported by overkill.wtf. My favorite of these is the bookmark list. This lets you create lists to keep your library organized so you can create theme lists or you can create other types of lists that help you prioritize what to play. You can check this app out on either iOS or Android. There is some really good news about the Steam Deck subreddit. Many people have complained in the past about how that subreddit was moderated. They'd received so much criticism that they famously ended up banning the word mod, which really is an incredibly silly thing to do on any PC-oriented Reddit. In any case, many of the problems were attributed to one main moderator who has now been replaced. The new moderators confess that there is a lot of work to be done, but they're confident that their experience is going to help them tackle those problems as quickly as possible. That is great to see, especially because above all, they appear to be listening to community feedback. All right, folks, that's going to do it for this week's Deck News Roundup. I really appreciate it. I hope you're all having a wonderful week. Deck Gang out. Goodbye.